Sage Wanderer here, and welcome to my new series, America's Descent into Madness. This series is my attempt to follow an 80-year period of American history, from 1944 to 2024. This series is an attempt to answer the question of how did we get here? I think most of you watching this channel and watching this video right now would agree that America is descending into madness, that the America of today bears little resemblance to the America of just one generation ago, if 70 years is a full generation, that the last 80 years has seen such a transformation, not just in American culture, not just in American economics and business, not just in an American military and political, but the very fabric of our society has undergone a change that is almost unprecedented in human history. Part of this has a great deal to do with technology, but a lot of it is cultural, and some of it seems to make some of the conspiracy theories look more like conspiracy fact. And so we're going to look at this 80-year period from my perspective, with a special focus on the 56 years that I have been alive on this earth. And before we get started, I want to thank all of you who support this channel, both with your thumbs up, your subscription, your comments, and your sharing of videos, but most especially for you who help me financially and support this channel with your financial donations. This channel is funded completely by viewers like you. I receive no money from YouTube or from any advertisers, and you'll not see a commercial or an ad on any of these videos. So it's up to you to keep the lights on here in my cabin in the woods and keep this information coming. So, you know, if you want to look at the foundation of it, some would argue that this descent into madness has been cooking for maybe hundreds of years. Conspiracy theorists say it goes back many centuries. And Billy Joel, the famous pop singer, piano player, and a personal influence on my music, wrote a song called "We Didn't Start the Fire," and he claimed it was always burning since the world was turning. And although that is true, there's no doubt that the last 80 years has been incredibly impactful on the American experience and the world in general. As they say, as America goes, so goes the world. And I want to look at how we got here, some of the events that led us here. I want to talk about how what was once considered conspiracy theory is now being seen as history and reality. And we will cover a lot of different topics as we walk through this 80-year period. So I want to take us back to the end of World War II. World War II was a Herculean task that the American people took on upon themselves to, you know, when they joined or were forced into World War II, the whole nation came together. Patriotism was so common as to be absolutely a societal norm or even a necessity for you to be patriotic, that we all banded together to defeat fascism, to stop the murder of millions of Jews, and to put an end to a war in Europe and in the Pacific Rim that was causing the death of hundreds of thousands or even millions of people. And this was an effort that took every man, woman, and child who was a citizen of the United States working together to make those things come about. We defeated them through prayer. We defeated them with American courage, and we defeated them with American the hard-working work ethic of the American people. Rosie the Riveter, right? The whole family pitched in. The kids collected scrap metal for the use in the war. People did without. There was rationing, right? The entire populace of the United States was joined together to defeat fascism in World War II. At the end of World War II and the cessation of violence worldwide, we were left with this vacuum. The military-industrial complex is what it's called. This thing, this war machine that was built to win World War II was now sitting idle. And the economy and money flow was all dependent, and had been dependent for the past 5 years or more, on this war that was now over. And looking back in history, this would launch a golden era of American life. The 1950s and early 1960s were a time of prosperity, harmony, low crime, low unemployment, and some would call it the golden age. But Dwight D. Eisenhower, at the end of his 2-term presidency, would give a speech warning us of a thing he called the military-industrial complex. It was the war machine, and not just the war machine, not just the military, not just the military contractors, but all of the industrial elements of our economy, all of the energy components of our economy, all of our corporations had all been involved in this war effort, and there was a definite need to keep it alive. And this push against the President of the United States to drive us into this period of forever wars so the machine could keep working was something that Dwight D. Eisenhower had been fighting against as president, and he warned us upon his departure that this was the greatest threat to democracy, back when that really meant that. And, you know, he talked about how this thing could become bigger than the American people. It could become bigger than our government. It could become the most powerful thing on the planet. And the next 80 years is really proof of that. This would give birth to a thing we call now the deep state. This would give birth to things like election meddling, blackmail, manipulation of the very rich and famous, and even a civil war would start to develop within its own nucleus. The nucleus of the military-industrial complex would, over this 80-year period, develop a rift, a disagreement on how to proceed, and that this would eventually manifest into what we're seeing today, this polarization and division within the United States. For you to understand where you're going, you better know where you've been. And that's one of the things I'm an expert in. You know, I'm a documented genius that plays 12 instruments. But I'm only in my older years becoming aware of the power of my mind. I wish I knew when I was young how powerful this brain is that God gave me. And the thing that is really that blows me away today is my memory of details of the past, my understanding of history. And so I want to, in this series, show you where we've been, show you the changes I have lived through in this society, in this great experiment in the Democratic Republic, whatever you want to call it. It's a republic, but this great freedom experiment that we call the United States of America. When I was a young boy, I was surrounded by people from a different era. The world was undergoing a great change, a change that is still occurring to this day, that's actually escalating. It's like a snowball, right? It gets bigger with every turning of the calendar year. And, well, how did Merle Haggard put it? It's going downhill like a snowball headed for hell. This descent into hell is escalating on an algorithmic scale. And it's exponential. And I've seen it in my lifetime, and honestly, it's jarring. I think the change just in the last 50 years has been so extreme and hard to deal with that it's actually manifested in forms of mental illness, because people aren't wired to endure this level of change, and it breaks certain people. It can break you in your spirit. It can break you in your mind. It's very hard to adapt. And yes, technology is part of that, and I might do a talk about how the Unabomber called it, right? This technology is causing it to escalate. But I was born in kind of a very odd time. I was born in 1968, and my earliest memories go back to late 1969, early 1970. Yes, I remember events from when I was 2 years old. That's part of the beautiful gift that God gave me. I can remember being bathed in the sink when I was 6 months old. And I can remember a family move across country that happened before my second birthday. And some of my earliest memories are when we got a TV. We got our first TV, I was about 4. So I grew up watching very graphic news coverage on the ground of the Vietnam War. I grew up watching these demonstrations that had been going on since before I was born, in opposition to and in protest of the Vietnam War. So at the end of World War II, we have a united country of patriots, survivors of this great war and this worldwide struggle. America went from being an obscure nation filled with potential just in 4 years to ruling the world and dividing the world essentially between us and the Soviet Union. I think that the vacuum that was caused by the end of World War II and the effect that it would have on this war machine that was created to defeat fascism, they had to have another war. They had to have another enemy. They couldn't just mothball all this stuff. They couldn't go back to the way it was before. The economy was dependent upon this war machine continuing to grind out weapons, and therefore you have to have conflict. And so it became the goal of the military-industrial complex as early as the late 50s, 1960s era to cause these world conflicts to come into conflict. They had to create the Great Red Menace. They had to create the fear of the Soviets taking over the world. This is still coloring the decisions that people are making right now in Russia and Ukraine. This demonization of Russia that occurred. These proxy wars over Asian countries and Central American and South American countries was what kept the military-industrial complex in business. And they began to use our intelligence agencies. They infiltrated the news organizations. They infiltrated the political structure of the United States. They bought off senators and congressmen and governors around our country to keep the forever wars coming. The central focus of at least one of the main focuses of this current political campaign for Donald Trump and RFK Jr. is the concept of ending these forever wars. These forever wars were invented by the military-industrial complex to keep the conflict brewing. They can't have peace. If they have peace, they'll go out of business. And many people in government believe that without the military-industrial complex, without the arms and the military contractors pumping out all of these munitions that are being used in wars around the world, without that, the American economy would have crumbled. But I want to talk a minute about the cultural changes that went hand in hand with this. That from 1945 until 1965, there was a common uniform worn by all men. This was still present in the early 70s when I was a young boy, and didn't start to fade away until the late 1970s. So the first 5 or 6 years of my life, all of my memories are filled with men wearing this same exact cultural uniform. It consisted of a dark suit, a white shirt, a tie, a wristwatch in gold or silver metal, and a wedding ring. No other thing was worn. Occasionally, maybe a tie clip, right? A political pin if you were doing something political. But this uniform was worn by everyone who left the house. You didn't leave the house unless you were wearing this outfit. And this was still in place to where it was easy to tell the counterculture people from the rest of America when I was a young boy. It was easy to tell the hippies, the leftists, right? The pro-communist people, the anti-government types, by their outfit. They wore their hair long. They wore blue jeans and t-shirts. They wore tennis shoes. The rest of America wore that uniform that had been in place since the 1930s, to tell you the truth. Dark suit, white shirt, tie, wingtip dress shoes, watch, wedding ring, and fedora hat. They never left the house without a hat. Now, if you had a dirty job, your dirty job would also have a uniform. It would be gray, green, dark blue, or tan. It would consist of cotton trousers, a cotton button-up collared shirt, right, and a matching hat, usually some kind of work hat, like a ball cap, but not a ball cap. Yeah, might have to go look at those hats. I don't even know what they're called. They were work hats. If you saw a man dressed like that, you knew he was a mechanic, you knew he was a plumber, and he was at work or on his way to work. If you didn't see him in that attire, then it was back to everyone wore a suit. The ladies dressed up, wore full makeup and hats and white gloves anytime they went to the store. And this was still present in the early 1970s in my childhood. And just in that period from 1972 until 1985, we saw a transformation and a move away just in fashion, right, to a much more casual wear, to a point where by the mid-1980s, the only people that wore suits on a daily basis were lawyers, preachers, and executives in business. And the common man dressing up to go out was over. It was the era of jeans and t-shirts. Through the same period, I had a front row seat in the sexual revolution. In the early 1970s and late 1960s, there were almost no divorced people. Everyone was married. If they had single people, they were called teenagers and college students, right? Anybody over the age of 18 was pretty much married. And there were no singles bars because there were no single people. We always had people in the culture from the very beginning that were confirmed bachelors, that were spinsters that didn't get married. And we all understood that this was code for people who had chosen a homosexual lifestyle. And it was the way of the world was don't ask, don't tell. And the what we know now as the LGBTQ plus whatever community grew out of people who were tired of living in the shadows, and they started to come out of the closet. And this would grow into a political movement that has taken on a life of its own and become, unfortunately, just another cog in the wheel of this giant civil war that is in place in the United States today. This is a culture war. This is an economic war. They wanted to make it a race war, but that's not working out in their favor, right? Since people are waking up from every race, creed, color, religion, your past political stand doesn't mean anything anymore. And that has occurred in my lifetime. And we've become very polarized to where, unfortunately, in this world, it's either you're pro-Trump or you're pro-communist. You're pro-totalitarian. And it really is the military-industrial complex has created this dichotomy. They've created this polarization. And part of it is that they have difference of opinions on how the country ought to be led, right? So you got people manipulating on both sides to create this polarization. And the polarization itself is starting to break down, because we're finding out, 200 people of the Republican variety endorsed Kamala Harris. And then you've got Tulsi Gabbard and RFK, which were high-ranking Democrat politicians who joined the Trump campaign. So we're seeing a breakdown of this polarization. And what you're starting to see is the people who are awake to the military-industrial complex, they're awake to the counterculture, they're awake to the totalitarianism and the end of free speech, they're awake to people that are trying to take our guns away, they're awake to people that are trying to take control over raising our children and indoctrinating them. We're understanding that our universities no longer serve us, that our government is no longer trustworthy, and all of that has happened in my life, in my lifetime. In the early 1970s, everybody, except the hippies, trusted the government. It was Watergate, something that occurred when I was a young child. where we caught a politician, Richard M. Nixon, the president, doing something shady in his political campaign. He was spying on his political opponents and trying to collect dirt on them. And there was a burglary at the Watergate Hotel where a group of people sent there by Nixon, the standing president, were sent there to burglarize it and see what they could come up with. Nowadays, stuff like that happens all the time, and nobody's getting impeached over it. Nobody's even getting called down over it. In fact, the press used to blow the whistle on people like this, and now the press is actively involved in covering up this kind of corruption. Of all the things that I have been forced to assimilate to, all the things I've been forced to accept in my lifetime, all the change that's been forced onto me, the greatest change has been the cultural changes that I've had to endure in my lifetime. Once upon a time, everyone helped everyone else. If your car broke down alongside the road, people would pull over and offer to help you or give you a ride. Hitchhikers weren't seen as dangerous. They were seen as someone who needed a ride. The many decades long tradition of catching a ride, really since the very beginning of the car, and may have even gone back as far as hitching a ride on the wagon. But sticking your thumb out, a good Samaritan would just pull you over and give you a ride with no fear of their own safety, with no dubious intentions against the person needing a ride. It was a place of trust. Americans trusted one another in the late 60s and early 70s. And this trust in each other would slowly erode through violence and criminality that started to spread like a cancer through our society. Once again, technology plays a role in this, but I blame really movies and television for this decline in American trustworthiness. You start to see a change when early movies you had a definitively good guy and a definitively bad guy, and the good guy wore the white hat and the bad guy wore the black hat, and you had this clear moral story. By the time we get to the 1970s, you have movies like Taxi Driver, where they intentionally blur the lines of righteous violence and insane murder, and they start to make the dark side characters more relatable, and they start to make them have excuses, give you sympathy for the devil, right? And this starts to change the minds of the humans on planet Earth, and especially in the United States of America. And you start to see random violence and serial killers. This all starts to happen in the 1970s. When I was a little kid, in the 1970s, early 1970s, us kids would just kind of run in packs. We'd leave the house in the morning and we'd stay out all day. Nobody got kidnapped. Nobody got killed, right? There wasn't any fear. If you misbehaved in public, somebody else's parent would probably come and call you down and take you over and make you call your mom on the payphone and confess to your crime, right? That there was this general morality, general trustingness in the American people that quickly eroded. I'll never forget the first real child abduction. Now children disappear on a daily basis, and children are killed in various situations. There's a case out right now of a woman who stabbed and drowned her own children. That kind of stuff was unheard of. And then there was a boy that was abducted from a Kmart. That was another thing. We would go to Kmart, and the parents would go one way and the kids would go another, and we would have this great big kid fest party time in the toy section, playing cops and robbers and cowboys and Indians, and nobody cared unless we got too loud. And nowadays, you don't let go of your kid's hand for fear that they will be abducted by some maniac. And the first one of those was the son of a man who would later host the television show America's Most Wanted. But his child was abducted, I believe, in a Florida Kmart, there with his parents. There one minute, gone the next, and his body was found in a bar ditch, mutilated sometime later. That crime shocked a nation to the point where his involvement in trying to solve his own son's murder caused him to become a television star. And now things like this happen on a daily basis, and we hardly ever notice. I remember the first mass shooting. Now, technically the first mass shooting was in America that really made news. In modern times, put it that way. I'm not talking about the Old West. I don't know what might have happened back there. But in this time period that I'm talking about, a former Marine and veteran and patriot got a brain tumor, became delusional, and had paranoid delusions. He climbed up in a tower in Austin, Texas, and shot a bunch of people. That was kind of a random event. It was due to this brain tumor. The first time that a normal member of society with no medical problems committed an act like this was in the 80s, when a man just for no reason shot up the playground at the McDonald's, targeting children who were with their parents at one of the safest places in the world, McDonald's. We would just drop kids off at McDonald's and come back and pick them up in an hour. That's the old world. And you can see how much the world has changed. We've gone from a time when kids felt safe, when men and women could feel safe as long as it was daylight. You could feel safe walking down the street at night in most towns in America. You know, today, just since I've lived in Oklahoma for the last 4 years, it's gone from a period where you would get a story about a murder every once in a while, till in the last few years there's been multiple mass murders that occurred just in the last year here close to me where I live in rural Oklahoma. And every night there's at least one murder on the news. Every night somebody dies in Oklahoma City, and that's probably one of the safest cities in America, still to this day. But once upon a time, if a murder occurred, it made national news. It was a national news story when a man named Sam Shepard, I believe, who was a doctor, was accused of killing his wife. And he had said that a one-armed man had come in and killed his wife while he was sleeping, and that he woke up seeing the guy fleeing the room. This would give birth to a somewhat fact-based fictional story called The Fugitive that would result in a movie starring Harrison Ford. The story of a man being accused of killing his wife was national news. Now it's daily news that families turning on each other, parents killing children, children killing parents, husband killing wives, wives killing husbands, grandparents killing their sons and daughters. This is becoming commonplace. How did we get here? It was what many of you are asking. So we have to look at where we have been. So this particular video is really concentrated on the first 30 or 40 years of this. And it's just going to get deeper as we see the military-industrial complex seizing power throughout our nation. We see the counterculture and the pro-communist movement becoming powerful forces in our government. In the next video, we'll talk about the Clintons and their impact on America. We will talk about the last time America came close to a civil war, the mid-90s that would result in the Ruby Ridge shooting, the Waco standoff and fire, and the bombing of Oklahoma City Federal Building here in Oklahoma City. How this battle came home, and it went to sleep for a while. We had a little bit of stability, and we're going to talk about how it revamped, where we're at now, and what we're going to see next in this battle for our culture as America descends into madness. We'll see you next time. Don't forget to support the channel. Links in the description.